Welcome back. So what we've seen so far is we can save files inside the container by clicking the disk icon. We can download the file to our local machine either as IPMB files, Python files or whatever. That's quite useful. We've also seen that we can go to the home screen and we can upload files as well, browsing through our local machine. And I've also told you you can use FileZilla. It's compatible with Ubuntu. You just need to log in using the key file, the PEM file, rather than uh, username and password. Now, if we go to the terminal, or we could do the same thing by just inside the notebook, and I use the Unix command ls-l, you'll see we've got that file there untitled, and that's the IPNB file. And we got to there by just being in this notebook here. In fact, I could change the name of that to titled or entitled. Uh, Linux, by the way, is case sensitive, so upper and lower case would be different. And if I rename that file, it will also have renamed this inside the container. So this is inside Linux, inside the container. Now what happens when we quit the container? Well, that's quite easy to do. Um, Usually the tidy way to do it is to actually shut all these individual things, but I can just go to the Jupyter tab here, the one which we've got files and running. I could shut everything down just using shutdown. Then I can say quit, and it tells us we can close the tab, and then actually these tabs there are then redundant. They'll complain, but uh, whatever. Now let's go back to the PowerShell. And remember, PowerShell is so we shut the container. Here's our line which says as your user, so you can see we're outside the container, we're inside the Ubuntu host. And if I do ls-l, you can see that actually nothing is saved. So even though we can save things to our local machine, the container has got the advantage that every time we start it, it will be a clean start and nothing will be there that we had before. So that's great from the point of view of security. So if you mess things up inside the container, you just quit the container and then you can just restart things. But it's not totally convenient because what you'd really like to happen is quite often you would want the files to be there on the host filing system. So that's actually quite easy to arrange, and we can map a folder. Let's create a folder. We'll call this notebooks. So we say mkdir notebooks, and then when we use our docker command, just going through the history here using the up arrow on the keyboard because I can't be bothered typing everything. Oops, rather a lot. So when we, and I'll scroll, zoom in here. When we use our docker command, you put -v and then the name of the local folder. So I just created that folder called notebooks. Home as your user is where we have logged into by default. And I can map that notebooks folder to a folder inside notebook user, which I've called working in this case. Let's see how this works. So we're starting the container in the usual way. We'll go back to the Jupyter page, asks us to log in again. We've now got the folder called working. I go into the folder called working so you can navigate through your folders. You can make subfolders as well here. There's, let's see, it's somewhere new. You can create new, and then folders are down there if you want to do that. But we're going to say new Python 3. We'll just put a usual thing, say just to make sure people know what we're doing. Use some markdown, hash my hash space, my directory or folder. Markdown uses simplified HTML as well, so you can put some paragraph kind of formatting in here. This is just to give us some content to work with, and then I can say insert cell below, and that's code. So I'll put 2 ** 16, 2 to the 16th, just to show we're computing something. I'll change this to titled, or retitled actually, just, so we've got something that we can recognize. Retitled. Save that. Tells us we've saved it. It says checkpointed, which means it's saved. I can in fact use Linux commands here, ls-l, and that should show that we've got this. But remember, we had the folder, the file title before, but when we quit the container, that disappeared. So let's quit the container now. And as I said, we'll go back to here. We look at running. We'll do shutdown. We can then quit that. It complains that we're leaving the page. Quit. It says Jupyter's shut down. Go back to PowerShell. A little bit of and you can see it shut down because we gave it a shutdown request. You can read all these commands here. And the question is, what happened to our folder? We've got this created at the top, home as your user notebooks. So if I now do, remember we've got the list command, ls-l, notebooks, and you can see our file is there already, or our file is still there. So next time we start the container, it's mapping to that file, mapping to that folder, which we called notebooks. So this is a good way to upload and download and maintain consistency. And as long as your instance, your virtual machine is running, you have access to those files. So you can also, when you upload files, either uploading them via that notebook or just straight to this Linux console. So this is quite handy again if you want to just check contents and move files around and so on. So there shouldn't be any reason to lose files. Just to refresh your memories, we've now got quite a long Docker command, and just to break down what the different parameters mean, I could have done this from the start of course, but I thought we'd make it simple. You always need to say sudo, which runs the command at administrator level. You can avoid that, but for security reasons it's not recommended. Run is the major one we use, and what it is running is this container here. Jeremy, I'm on KF732 21S latest. If the container isn't there, it will try and download it from a container registry. By default, that is Docker Hub, but both Azure and Amazon AWS have their own container registries, so they should be quite a bit quicker. We'll explore that later. So we met run -IT says it's going to be an interactive session. I mentioned at the start, Docker stores content in layers. So each time you do run, it adds a new layer. They do start to build up after a while. So rather than letting that happen, we've got one default container. We'll just keep running that. There's a book on Docker which tells you more advanced things you might want to do. What we just met was -v, which maps volumes. That's what this stands for. We've got a file here inside the host. So that's home as your user, as we can see there. I should zoom this in a bit. So here's as your user. That's the volume we're mapping. You put a colon and then the name of a working folder. I don't recommend mapping to just home notebook user. It's just that the security credentials for the password are in that folder, so you don't won't lose them, but you'll hide them, and then you have to log in with the generated container ID. Not complicated, but it's just a complication you don't need. So have a working folder there. You don't need to create that. That's created by the mapping. And when you go into that working folder, you'll find all the files which are in notebooks. So you might have notebooks and then a subfolder for that called data and so on. Just remember we're doing this port mapping from the port on the container to the port on the host. In this case, the host is the Azure instance, and then we're routing to that through the secure shell. So that sums it up for this little session, and these are basic skills, basic techniques that you'll need. Okay, so do practice through those, and they're very similar for AWS.